The problem is that the arts world does not need more bankers. The
Okay.
arts world needs people who are trained in the business, but who are simultaneously who understand the challenges and aspirations of creatives. And that's the key for us, is that everyone who's ever worked with me, we all have this schizophrenic background, business training.
Right.
We can put on a suit or whatever and stand up in front of a city council or a board of trustees and sound fiscally prudent about all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we've all worked professionally in the business as an artist or a director or a musician or a dancer, and we are credible with artists.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Nikoto Building Arts. I'm your host, Nikoto. Today, I'd like to welcome another wonderful guest, Duncan Webb. Duncan Webb is the founder of Webb Management Services, based in New York City. He founded the firm to provide management consulting services to the arts and cultural industries. Since its founding in 1997, the firm has successfully completed more than 475 consulting assignments for the advancement of cultural communities, organizations, and facilities. With over 40 years in arts administration and cultural planning, facility planning, I say he's an expert in this industry.
Yeah.
A certified management consultant. A certified management consultant, he has been an active speaker and published writer on arts management and the development, operation, and financing of arts facilities. His book, Running Theaters, Best Practice for Managers and Leaders, right here, which I have a copy of. We will talk about more in depth and how you can purchase a copy of it. It was translated into Mandarin and is being used to inform cultural development throughout China. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Duncan Webb to the Building Arts Video Podcast. How are you, Duncan?
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. It's so good to have you on. I think at first I started in this particular industry back in 1997, working in cost consulting for another company. Been in construction, 9 years, 10 years prior to that, but in the cost consulting of performing arts, theaters, and this whole genre, this whole industry. I came across your name many times, but hadn't had a chance to meet you. But I did get the opportunity to meet you, I think it was last year on a project or the previous year.
Right, we tried to get that project again.
Yeah. So we didn't get that one, but we've been on other projects with you as well. So it's glad to have you on the podcast to learn more about you and allow my viewers to hear about your story and the things you do, being an integral part in this performing arts industry.
Okay,
So
you asked for it.
Say it again.
I say you asked for it. You're going to get it.
I asked for it. Yeah. Yeah. So just to start from the beginning, sort of, just to find out more about you and your background and where you come from, and if you can start there.
Sure. So I'll do my origin story. So I grew up in Toronto. I did lots of theater through high school and college. But when I graduated from college, I dutifully went to work at the bank. And I was very quickly bored to tears, and I wasn't very good at it. So I decided that I wanted to get involved in the theater scene. So I sent a letter out to about 6 different experimental theater companies in Toronto. So this is 1980. Toronto had an amazingly sort of vibrant alternative theater scene at that moment in time. So I sent them all letters and saying, I'm a young banker. I'd like to come and volunteer at your theater. And nobody answered, and nobody answered, and nobody answered. And finally, I got a call from a woman who ran a place called the Theater Center, which still exists, which was this just getting started. It was a co-op of 5 experimental theater companies. Toronto's first gay theater, Toronto's first company that was doing video and live production together, the guy who started doing environmental theater. So really interesting kind of out there theater companies. And they basically shared the space. So I think she was just curious. Why would this banker want to come involved with us? So I got involved. I wrote their first grant application. I helped them form their first board of directors. I taught them how to do a budget. And I had a moment where I said, wait a minute, this is good. I can actually make a difference in the creative sector while still being a suit, because I kind of knew at that point I was always going to be a suit. I was a terrible actor. I was a terrible director. I wasn't creative, but I loved the theater. So lo and behold, this sort of discovery that I could still make a difference despite who I was, or even because of who I was. So I got involved with them and a couple of other groups as a volunteer. Then I started producing theater on the side. And finally, I left the banking world and went into the sector as a producer. And I produced commercial theater, I produced experimental theater, and I did a bunch of industrials, big shows for car companies and toy companies that paid for me to go to grad school. And while I was at grad school doing my MBA, I got a call from a friend who was on the board of the Toronto Symphony. And they had just moved out of Massey Hall, which was this beautiful old 1894 concert hall, into Roy Thompson Hall, which was a shiny new building. And the symphony owned Massey Hall, but they didn't know what to do with it. And they said, well, can you help us? I said, sure, I'll do a study. And I had no idea what to do, but I kind of leapt in to try and advise them on what to do with Massey Hall. And while I was starting, I discovered, or a theater director I was working for said, I met a guy on a plane who does something sort of like that. And it turned out it was Richard Pilbrow from Theater Projects Consultants, because at that point they were working on the first iteration of the Ballet Opera House in Toronto. So I contacted Richard and I came to New York, spent a weekend in New York, or a couple of days with them, and they basically sort of coached me on how to do one of these studies. So I went back, I did the study, it worked, and it was sort of an amazing thing that we actually figured out the right answer for the future of Massey Hall. And then I said, that I really enjoyed doing that work. Maybe I ought to make a career out of that. So I basically bugged Theater Projects for about 1.5 years until they hired me. And I moved to New York the day after completing my graduate studies, and that was in 1989. So I was with them for 6 years, and then I spent a couple of years at AMS, and then started my own practice in 1997. And now, actually, we just started Project 502.
Oh, wow.
So we broke the 500 number, which I was thrilled.
Yeah. Cause for celebration there. Cause for celebration. Yeah, you mentioned how you came out of the banking and that management world. So I would say, I guess the arts world really needs someone to have that management experience to facilitate bringing their arts to life, because they're more artsy, but you had the business acumen to be able to help them and
right.
improve.
The problem is that the arts world does not need more bankers.
Okay.
The arts world needs people who are trained in the business, but who are simultaneously who understand the challenges and aspirations of creatives. And that's the key for us, is that everyone who's ever worked with me, we all have this schizophrenic background: business training,
Right.
We can put on a suit or whatever and stand up in front of a city council or board of trustees and sound fiscally prudent about all this stuff.
Mhm.
But we've all worked professionally in the business as an artist or a director or a musician or a dancer, and we are credible with artists. Artists and arts organizations can talk to us and we can listen to them and figure out what they need, and they can believe that we can try and advance their vision for new facilities in ways that are responsive to their needs, but also fiscally prudent and responsible and all that other stuff. So that sort of schizophrenic background for me and my staff is always the thing that matters.
It was not just a bottom line money
Yeah,
thing, but it's
because
also a passion.
all the business people who get involved in the sector, they
Mhm.
say, well, if only these arts organizations knew how to operate like a business,
Right,
everything would be
right.
fine, which just isn't true. It's just not the case.
Yeah.
It is fundamentally economically challenging to create art, and there are no productivity gains over time in the way that art is created. So
Yeah.
we have to respond to that and support that.
Mhm. And I heard you mention Richard Pilbrow, and I think I read one of his books and seen a couple of his talks. So that's pretty awesome that you had an opportunity to get an initial training through his company as well, through him.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Awesome,
that was great.
awesome.
And of course, the other funny thing is that Steve Wolf from AMS, he had my
Right.
job at theater projects before me, so he
Okay.
got that same good training from Richard and all that gang, and went out on his own. And his thought was, I'm going to go my own, and you can do these study. I'll do the study part for you. And then theater projects turned around and hired me, which was a bit frustrating for him. And then he
Yeah.
kept saying for years, "Well, you come and work for me," which eventually I did. So we both have long histories with theater projects.
I find that a lot in this industry is like a small knit group of people in this industry. So
Right.
cross paths,
Well, it's
yeah.
like in your sector, Stuart Donnell,
Right.
everyone who sort
Yep.
of spun out of his orbit.
Exactly.
Or in the acoustics world, it's the people who spun out from Russ
Arctic.
Johnson
Mhm.
or Chris
Yeah.
Jaffe or Larry
Yeah.
Kirkegaard. It's these,
Yeah.
iterations and generations
Yeah. Yeah.
talent that have come out of our sector.
Yeah. Yeah. The tree. So just to that's great. You are a management consultant that who builds and operates theaters. So for the person that don't know, can you describe what is a theater management consultant? What does it comprise?
Well,
I guess.
right. I don't know what it is, but let me say what we do. So
Okay.
essentially, we do feasibility studies, business planning, and strategic planning. Right. So
Okay.
traditional management consulting work in the sector. So feasibility studies are, we think our community needs a theater. Is it feasible? So
Mhm.
we do work and understand the market opportunity and the needs in a community in order to develop sort of concepts. And then the second half of the feasibility study is sort of the business plan that comes with that. Okay, we're going to do this thing. We've decided, we want to build this 1,500 seat theater or whatever. How do we program it? How do we operate it? And how do we financially sustain it? And when we're doing that work, we are generally working alongside some combination of physical planners. So architect and or theater consultant and or cost consultant and or acoustician, who are starting to sort of build the concept from a physical perspective while we are addressing that concept from an operational perspective.
So okay.
Two parts about helping
Mhm.
people build and fix. And then the other part, which is to me, the most interesting work these days, is the traditional strategic planning in existing facilities.
Okay.
All these buildings come out of the pandemic. They had a pretty good balance sheet with some financial support, but now what? How do they get their audiences back? How do they deal with streaming? What does the future look like? How do they support these arts organizations who are all in a very sort of fragile state? So we do strategic plans in existing theaters. And then there's a little bit of other work around cultural district planning, which to me is kind of facilities planning without walls. It's like multiple facilities distributed in an urban core. And then we also have some pure sort of research gigs. So we're doing work for Dance NYC, for example. We're doing kind of a ongoing research project for them to understand the state of the New York City dance sector through primary research.
So you come in on the beginning of the project and manage. Yeah. So how do you get hired for a project? That's a question there. How do you get hired for the project?
Right. So, we have our network. We have these folks, these 100 people out around the country. We are fairly confident that when they hear about something, they will either contact us or they will send somebody our way, or they will say that there's an RFP out for a study and such, go for it. So a lot of the work is competitive now, which is tough because we do have lots of competition. So there's an RFP that a city issues or a school or something. So we have to respond to that, write a proposal. If we get shortlisted, there's sometimes an interview. Unfortunately, through Zoom, through the pandemic and after, we don't really have live interviews anymore, which is too bad because we used to do. I'm sure it's shocking, but I don't really do that well on Zoom. I have a hard time sort of connecting with people electronically. So I sort of miss going to do these live interviews. And then there are other cases where somebody calls up and they want to do something and they just asked us to write a proposal to help, and we do. So a chunk of our work comes through our relationships with architects and theater consultants and acousticians and cost consultants and engineers and fundraising consultants and search consultants. But then a lot of others are referred through past clients.
So you've done over 500 now. I said over 475. Now it's over 500 projects. So, out of those, are there any favorites that come to mind, or that you can think of and talk about a little bit?
Well, what I love is that each and every one is different. So for example, we have 3 projects in the state of Florida right now. So one of them is doing a little economic impact study for the Sarasota Orchestra, right? They're doing this giant project. It's like a $300 million project. And they've already done all the feasibility study work, but they asked us to come in and sort of crunch the numbers to project the economic impacts of the project on the region as and when it's built. Okay, so that's a nice little piece of work on a big private sector project.
Right.
Another one is in Osceola County. So we've been hired by the county there. They are the master developers of this big 200-acre site. They're attracting research and science-based companies from around the world, European, Asian companies, to come and locate in Osceola County. And they said, well, we ought to have some kind of a arts and entertainment component to this project. So our job is to advise them on what to do. You think you need something, so what do you need? So we just this last week presented to the county administrators an idea for a new indoor facility and some outdoor facilities. It's complicated because it's close to Orlando, and Orlando has the Dr. Phillips Center and some very good facilities. So what is the facility that makes sense in Osceola County that can succeed in the shadows of some of these other bigger projects and buildings?
Right.
And then the third project we're just about to start is at South Florida State College. So like in the middle of the state. It's like the town is called Avon Park.
Yeah.
And as they said, it's cattle and citrus groves. But they have a little 500-seat theater, and they're really struggling with attracting audiences. So they hired us to do kind of research and advise them on programming strategy and marketing strategy. What are the shows they should bring to that building? and how do they market those shows in order to sell the number of tickets they need to sell. So 3 very different types of projects, all in Florida.
Mhm.
I've always loved working in Florida. Just it's always, you know,
Yeah.
the the con artist and the retired New Yorkers, and I've always really gotten a big kick out of working down there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm right here in Tampa, so I've heard of a couple of those projects, so
Yep.
I have a little experience with them. Yeah, it seemed like I was reading an article the other day, and they were just showing how the percentage of theaters in by state. I think California had the most, and then followed by New York. Florida wasn't on the list just yet, so maybe in the future, Florida will get higher on that list.
Yeah, I mean, Florida is amazingly active in the arts. I mean,
Hmm.
because there are so many people that have retired there from the
Right.
Northeast and the Midwest who are used to the arts as a fundamental part of their life. So many communities in Florida have been building theaters in the last 30 years. You know,
Mhm.
with the big projects like Broward and the Kravitz
Right.
Center in Miami.
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, all sorts of smaller buildings in smaller communities all over the state. So it really is quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, you've dealt with many clients and have a vast amount of experience in understanding best practices and developing managing theaters, and so much so that you wrote the book. And
There's the book.
you wrote the book on it. Not many people can say that, right? Running theaters. So just for a moment, I'd just like to discuss this book. It might be showing up backwards there, but I'll put
No,
the
no.
information. Is it showing up okay? I'll put
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
information below.
So the
It's
idea of the book was, okay, I'm learning a few things about theaters,
yeah.
but the key is that the people who run these buildings really are fantastic. I mean, they're
Mhm.
so smart and so committed. They work so hard. They, you know, advance these projects, and they're out in their communities, you know, really advancing the arts and making a huge difference in their communities. So I said to myself, any book about this really needs to be told by them, by the people who run these buildings. So the first edition, which was 1985, anyway, I did 40 interviews with facility managers across the country on all these different topics, from programming to fundraising to
Mhm.
education and building. You know, how do you develop facilities and outdoor facilities and campus facilities? Really trying to collect best practices. And the fun part of the book for me are all the quotations from these managers in the book. So, you know, I'm kind of weaving it together, but it's their stories that matter. And then a few years ago, the publisher said, you know, some time has passed. The book is still sort of popular. So let's do a second edition. So I did that. I added got another 15, 20 interviews with other facility managers, and I kind of downloaded that into the book. I changed a bunch of chapters. And of course, we finished it about like 2 months before COVID hit. Um,
Mm.
so,
Oh,
so the revised version was published during COVID,
wow.
when, you know, initially I'm going, well, nobody's going to look at this. But I think what we discovered is that COVID really has just accelerated a lot of the trends that were already happening, whether it was about streaming, whether it was about programming, or, you know, building loyalty with audiences or fundraising. It just accelerated a bunch of trends that were already advancing. Automation is another big one. So, you know, not many books sold in the 2020, but
Yeah.
again, the book seems to be resonating with folks through 21 and 22, and this year a little bit too. So it was a great project. Again, it was, you know, the key is not what I know. It's the stories that I collected from the men and women who run these buildings, because they're the heroes.
Mhm. I guess during COVID, you probably got a lot of phone calls because a lot of organizations were struggling during that time. So trying to get a vision to how to manage through those tough times, I'm sure you had to advise on those situations.
Um, they were, I mean, the good ones knew what they needed to do. The good ones
Okay.
were really, they were focused on one, retaining their staff, two, strengthening their balance sheet, going out and doing fundraising to essentially get them through the pandemic in a way that they could retain as much as their staff as they could. And three, finding ways to stay active through virtual programming and streaming programming and other things out into the community that made sure that they were not forgotten. Even though the building would be closed, they were finding ways to be active, to maintain awareness and support, and to drive financial support through the pandemic. And then, these big industry groups came together to pursue the shuttered venues grants and other grants. So I think the sector came out of the pandemic in pretty good shape. The challenge has been more this year, in because audiences have been slow to come back,
Mhm.
and we have this new problem that it's been very hard to staff a lot of the temporary positions, whether it's technical labor or event staff or ushers. Buildings are really struggling to recruit, train, and retain all of the staff needed to provide a high level of customer service. That's the real challenge right now, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've seen over the years successful and not so successful or struggling uh, organizations, facilities. Is there like a key thing that you've noticed, key successful trait out of all the ones that are successful at their work?
So if I had to boil it down to one thing, I would say that one thing is there's the difference between buildings that look inwards and buildings that look outwards. There's some buildings and organizations that look inwards that say it's all about what happens on the stage and then everything follows that.
Mhm.
That's nice, but the buildings that succeed are the ones that start by looking out into their community and saying, where is our community going? And how can we help them get there? What role can we play in advancing our community and the vision for the future of this place? So that means a very different perspective. It means inviting different kinds of people into the building. It means different kinds of programming. It means engaging in partnerships across many different levels within the community. But what that does is that it proves to the community how integral the performing arts facility is to the life of the community. In that
Mhm.
first vision, it's all about what's on stage, it can be seen as something elitist and exclusive. It's just about this fancy artist doing something fancy. In the second vision, it's all about the arts facility connecting to the community and helping to advance the community. And that's the thing that fundamentally drives support.
That just makes me think. A part of your book, you mentioned about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, it was diversity, inclusion, and equity at one time, and and looking outward into the community. Is that something that is improving, or what's your thoughts on
Oh boy.
how it's
Okay, boy, do
happening?
I have a lot to say about this. But the the fundamental problem with this conversation is me. I am a straight old white guy, and I out in lots of the sector, I am either a dinosaur or I am part of the problem. So
Mm,
it's really hard work for me to convince anyone to begin with that I have something meaningful to add to the conversation. So that is my first and foremost challenge, is being allowed to be at the table to have these conversations. And I absolutely agree that there are many other people who should be at the table before I am, because their voices are probably more important than mine. But having said that, I do want to be at the table. I do want to be able to talk about this stuff. And because it is a really important and really problematic discussion in the sector right now. When you think of traditional theaters, they are fundamentally exclusive. They are fundamentally elitist. They are about the showcasing the creativity of dead white European men. I mean, we just start from a place that is everything is wrong. So the transformation of the sector in order to be more exclusive and equitable and diverse is really hard. And so we have projects now where we are trying to help our clients respond to a mandate to do that. So, for example, we're doing a project for the city of San Diego. They're doing a cultural master plan, right? And we are one small part on a big team. Cultural planners, that's a whole other type of work, that advising cities on how to do the arts, right? Mm-hmm. And in this case, there's a facilities piece, which is one small part of it. So we are a subconsultant on that team. And what we learned when we arrived was the mayor is given a mandate to every city department that everything they do needs to be seen through an equity lens, right? So that then comes down to us and our work around facilities. So we say, all right, can you give us some principles that we should use in order to guide these? I mean, in San Diego is this huge set of cultural facilities, many of which are very kind of, old school museums and big old theaters and, Shakespeare and fine art museums and, that kind of stuff. So what are the principles that come out of that equity mandate that we can use to, advise these facilities? And there's nothing. There's an office of equity within the city that is meant to be the ones who are helping translate that equity, that mandate into policy and practices, but they aren't there yet. They have all they have is kind of a vague notion of what equity might mean across different city departments. So essentially, it becomes our job to translate an equity mandate into a set of recommendations about how this big set of cultural facilities should be programmed and operated. So then we start going, okay, so what does that mean? Does it mean it's about the diversity of the staff? It means diversity on the leadership team. It should be about making sure that these facilities are available and accessible to every artist and arts organization in or around San Diego. Is it about ensuring that the programming in these venues is appropriate or compelling to sort of broad cross sections of the community? So that's the work we have to do now, and it's a really big, complicated job. So
yeah, I think that speaks to you.
Yeah. Now here's the other part of this. Yeah. Performing arts venues are being drawn into these very difficult conversations and conflicts around equity, diversity, social justice, and a lot of them are really struggling with that. So, whether it's something like how poor old Salman Rushdie gets stabbed on the stage of a theater. Should the theater have adopted stronger safety and security policies and practices, given the politicized nature of the programming? Or what do you do when the Dixie Chicks perform and start, going on a rant about somebody and people in the audience are offended, and how does the building respond to that? Or I was working with a client recently up in Canada, and they had Jeff Dunham, the guy with the puppets, and he
Right.
was like, just rude and
Oh,
terrible,
wow.
and offensive. And these are city-owned, city-operated venues, and people are calling their city council members, going, "What the heck are you doing? Why are you this rude, offensive, racist, blah blah blah?" And they're going, "Why? How do we manage that?" Um, uh, so there's a whole set of big new challenges around. We're in a world now which is highly politicized. It's very divisive. Arts facilities are getting drawn into these sort of questions. Many artists and arts organizations have very progressive values and want to be out there. We need to be pushing hard for social justice and all this stuff. And then I hear facility managers and funders saying, wait a minute, be careful. We need to be Switzerland. We are neutral territory. Everyone should be welcome here, no matter of their political views. Let's not alienate our
right.
our audience. Here we are working with a client in New Hampshire. They need that country music audience to help pay the bills. So it's a very challenging world now, and again, I'm not the right person to be leading that discussion, but man, we are in these discussions every day now.
Yeah. Well, change is not always easy, but is necessary. So, one thing you mentioned was the outward-looking organizations being more successful, and I think that's one of the things that will help. And I assume that will start with the leadership of the organization. So the role of the leaders, I would assume, has a huge part in that success.
Right. Yeah. I'm most optimistic about that. I mean, the people who are out there running these buildings and the people coming up underneath them are very good. I'm very optimistic that we have the people who can run these buildings in ways that respond to community. The harder part is boards when it's private sector, and elected officials when it's public sector, and dealing with all the politics around that. That's the hard work.
Yeah. Just a couple of more questions before I let you go here. I was seeing over the past 30 years, I think since 1994, there was a huge building boom of performing arts centers. And so how do you, from your experience, how do you advise clients whether to build new, renovate, or not build at all?
Well, so the question of to build or not to build is the thing we try and answer in our first phase of our work. And it's always in terms of 4 questions. Number 1, is there an audience? So who lives there, who works there, who visits there? Are there enough of them? Do they want to come out? Are they likely to attend? So is there a potential audience? Number 2, what is the level and nature of demand on the part of users? So who are the artists and arts organizations and educators that need and want something more than they currently have, right? And if you add up all that demand in a space, would the building be busy? That's the most basic question. Do we have 150 days of use, or 250 days, or 50 days, or something? Can we put them in rooms that make sense for them and create? And is there demand? Issue 3 is, what's wrong with the current facilities you have, and are there gaps that we can potentially fill with this project, right? So 2 kinds of demand: audience demand and user demand, the people in the seats versus the people on stage. And then the third issue is the supply, right? So 2 kinds of demand against the supply. And then the fourth issue is, how does this project respond to the broader goals of the community? So if you did this thing, would it move you forward towards your vision for your community? Whether that's about economic development or quality of life or driving tourism or recruiting companies, does it move the community towards broader goals? And if so, how should the project be shaped in order to maximize those benefits? So those are the questions we ask and answer. We don't talk about cost yet. We just get to, yes, we think you need something roughly this and these pieces and capacities, functionality, flexibility, all that sort of stuff. Then the second half is the combination of my work, the business plan, and the physical planning. What does it cost to build? What does it cost to sustain? And that is where the hard reality comes on a lot of these projects, because as what it's like over $1,000 a square foot on some of these buildings right now, right? And then the annual funding requirement. Oh, sure, you want a 1,500 seat venue. Well, you've got to fundraise what, $700,000 a year to sustain that building. So you've got to give people the truth around what they're getting into physically and operationally and financially, and all we can do is basically give them the information and the tools to go out and see if the money's there. Right? That is the end point for us, is to give our clients the information they need to look at the financial aspects of whether or not they should proceed. And if they do, great. If they don't, I'm glad we helped them make the right decision.
Yeah, I guess it's been tough.
Having said that, the problem is, having said, people hate it when you say it's a bad idea. They always say at the beginning, "Oh, of course you should tell us if this is a bad idea," but they never want to.
They don't want to hear it. The bearer of bad news. I've been on that end on the cost side on many occasions, especially lately with so much escalation that we've been experiencing. So I remember seeing buildings years ago being $500, $600 a square foot, now being $1,000, $1,200, $1,300 a square foot, and I'm sure that's put a damper on some of the projects that you've seen. So.
Yep.
Yeah. So, last question is, what would you tell someone who would like to get into your line of work? There's not really a path. You came from banking into this sector. In America, I don't see there as a real straightforward path. But what would you advise a young person that wants to get into this business?
I think it's most important that they get experience in the field first. They should work in an arts organization or in a building or in a service organization before they come into our sector, because they need to understand, and they need to be able to empathize and work with those folks, because they kind of get it. So I'm typically, when we're hiring people who've got good experience in the sector already. But they'll people who decide they want to do this, they'll find us. And we're more than happy to talk to them.
Awesome. And lastly, how can our viewers get in contact with you? The best way.
Right. www.webb with 2 B's mgmt.org.
Okay. And
there we go.
They can go to your website, and I'll put that down in the link. And again, you can go out and get the book. Where can they get a copy of the book?
Amazon.com.
Amazon, okay.
Yes, sir.
Where books are sold.
I think it's like at $14.95 or something. So it's a good deal.
Yeah, great read. I've read it myself. Again, Duncan, thank you for being on the podcast, and I really appreciate your time. Hope to talk to you real soon.